Hello, everyone. Kia kotu. Thank you to those attending live or watching the recording. We're so excited to have you with us today to hear about this amazing use and implementation of a local context label. We'd like to start with passing it over to Dr. Jeanette Hamilton-Pierce for a Karakia, please.
Nā mihi atu ki a koe, Corey. Kia ora no tātou, nā mihi atu ki a koutou katoa. Nau mahara mai ki te kaupapa o te wā. He karakia mō tātou, ko rangi ki runga, ko papa ki raro, ka puta ki te whaiao, ki te ao marama, tihei mauri ora. Hei a koe, Corey.
Kia ora. Thank you, Jeanette, so much. So if you don't know me, I'm Corey Rowe, Director of Outreach and Strategy with Local Contexts. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a settler on Wappinger and Paugussett homelands, and I'll be helping to moderate this webinar today.
Hi, and I'm Emily Sampanam. In case you don't know me, I'm the Outreach Coordinator for the Americas with Local Contexts. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation, currently living and working in the lands of the Red Willow people in Taos, New Mexico. So I'll also be helping to moderate this webinar. Just a little bit of background about Local Contexts. We are an international nonprofit organization focused on supporting Indigenous data sovereignty and cultural authority. We offer digital labels called the traditional knowledge and biocultural labels for Indigenous communities to reinforce rights, and the disclosure, engagement, and collections care notices for researchers, institutions, and organizations with Indigenous collections and data to clearly identify Indigenous rights and interests. The labels and notices can be used on a range of materials, from cultural heritage collections to eDNA samples.
So we're really excited. This webinar is going to be highlighting the first use of a biocultural label on thesis research. So we're going to hear from Fern Donovan, the researcher who collaborated with the Iwi, Ta'o Patuawa, a representative of the Iwi who applied the label, and Ori Atkins, Nick Crombie, and Max Sullivan from the university staff who ensured the label would be reflected in the institutional repository. The presenters are going to share their perspective and experience working with the use of the label, as well as what they hope to see in the future. So we're going to begin with hearing from our presenters, and we're going to end with answering audience questions, including those that you submitted during registration. Before we hand it over to our presenters, I'll do our organizational land acknowledgement. So as an organization that transcends geographic and national boundaries, Local Context acknowledges that all the lands and waters we occupy are Indigenous homelands. We recognize the ongoing significance of these lands and waters for Indigenous peoples in the past, present, and future. Our work is focused on addressing the ongoing legacy of settler colonialism and supporting a more equitable future. We do a land acknowledgement to disrupt settler colonialism and recognize whose lands we're on, as well as our responsibilities as guests here. Our presenters will each share for about 10 minutes each. We'll be starting with Fern Donovan. Fern, could you please introduce yourself and then begin sharing?
Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko ingarangi me kōtirana me airanga me wera te whakapaparanga mai. Engari ko waipoa me hokianga te whenua tupu. Ko hokianga tōku kāinga, e noho ana au ki whāngārei I nainei, ko Fern Donovan au, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora everyone, my name is Fern Donovan. I am a Pākehā or New Zealander of European descent. I grew up in the Waipoa Forest and the Hokianga, and I recently completed a Master of Science in Ecology and Biodiversity at Te Herenga Waka, Victoria University of Wellington. For my Masters, I undertook research in the Waipoa Forest with the aim to better understand the ecology and breeding behaviours of a threatened Indigenous freshwater fish species, short-jaw kōkapu, or Galaxias postvectus, are a migratory galaxid species endemic to New Zealand. Unfortunately, data collected from around the country shows that they are in decline, threatened by habitat loss, habitat modification, deforestation, climate change, and predation by invasive species. We surveyed the Waipoa River catchment to determine the area of occupancy of short-jaw kōkapu in the catchment. We also conducted habitat assessments and analysis to understand more about the habitat requirements. And finally, we intensively monitored approximately 20 adults in one of the Waipoa River's tributaries, examining the fish's behaviours during their spawning period, looking at the environmental cues that trigger them to spawn and the spawning habitat that they select. This information collected has since been used to implement the management of the threatened short-jaw kōkapu in the Waipoa. The Waipoua forest sits within the rohe or the tribal boundaries of Te Roroa. As I said in my introduction, I grew up in the Waipoua forest. My dad was a biodiversity ranger there between 2001 and 2008, and my parents have worked there as conservation contractors since. So I am lucky enough to have had a hononga or pre-existing relationship with many of the people of Te Roroa before embarking on my postgraduate research. This pre-existing relationship and the foundation of trust was fundamental to the success of this collaboration. When I decided to study shortjaw kōkapu in the Waipoua catchment, but before I had designed my research or formulated any specific research questions, I organised a meeting with Taho to discuss possibilities. This likely segues into what Taho will speak on, but suffice to say, Taho said he had something in mind regarding local context labels and their incorporation into my proposed research. Throughout my research, we maintained formal and informal two-way communications on the local context labels and all aspects of my research. Taho initiated and took the lead on creating a project page on the Local Context Hub, along with designing a definition for the biocultural label specific to my research in the Waipoua. This affirms the inherent interest that Te Roroa people have in the scientific collections and data, including digital sequence information about communities, people, and the biodiversity found within traditional lands, waters, and territories. The notice reflects a significant relationship and responsibility to biocultural materials from within the rohe of Te Roroa and associated scientific collections and data. This is quoted verbatim from the biocultural label definition on the Local Context project page for my research. I would like to acknowledge Taho for initiating and driving the incorporation of a biocultural label in my thesis. I really do believe that the reason that this collaboration worked is because of the already established foundation of trust and shared interest in the well-being of the Waipoua forest and its taonga. This has been expressed succinctly in the term forest first. This forest first principle applies to the whole of the forest and not just within your specific area of research. In the context of my work in the Waipoua, this applies strongly to biosecurity around Kodi dieback, which is an invasive pathogen. Stringent biosecurity measures are required to avoid the spread. Te Roroa, as the kaitiaki or guardians of the Waipoua forest and surrounding area, need assurance that these biosecurity measures will be met by anyone working within the forest. Building the cultural and ecological knowledge of a place takes time, and building a relationship of trust takes even longer. I was lucky in my case that a lot of this foundational work had been done by fortune of circumstance. I understand that in most instances this won't be the case. Clearly, the time required to do so is often beyond the timeframes of postgraduate research projects. And I have been pondering this and wonder whether the answer to establishing these relationships is through the university institutions developing that hononga with Indigenous communities. If the research supervisors have an established relationship and are culturally and ecologically inducted, then there is a foundational relationship to guide the researcher and to ensure the Indigenous communities of the integrity of their intentions. It is our responsibility as researchers and anybody working on Indigenous land to appropriately acknowledge the relationship between Indigenous communities and their land and taonga. Something I really wanted to emphasize today is how important it is that these labels are not viewed as a tick on a cultural and Indigenous relationship checkbox. The incorporation of a biocultural label in research is not checking a box, but a representation of the trust, aligned values, the collaborative relationship between the researcher and community, and a commitment to ensure that the accurate provenance, transparency, and integrity in research engagements with Indigenous communities is met and continues to be met long after the work is published. This presentation from me today is quite short because, to be honest, I feel like my part in incorporating this label was actually quite small. I want to again acknowledge Taho Patuawa for his vision and work which enabled this to happen. And to finish off my part, I want to end with a whakatauaki or proverb by Sir James Henare from Ngāti Hini, which I think is relevant to the kaupapa of today's webinar. Kua tāwhiti kē tō haerenga mai, kia kore e haere tonu, he nui rawa o mahi, kia kore e mahi tonu. We have come too far not to go further. We have done too much not to do more. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, kia ora tātou katoa.
Thank you so much, Fern. That was fantastic. Next, we'll be hearing from Taoho Patuawa. So I'll hand it over to you, Taoho, and take it away. Please introduce yourself too.
Kia ora kari, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Taoho Patuawa taku ingoa, he uri aua no Te Roroa, no Ngāpuhi, no Ngāti Whātua hoki. He kaimahia hau ki te iwi o Te Roroa, no reira tēnā tātou. Ai, e mihi ana ki a koe e Fern. Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction to this kaupapa. Very hard act to follow, but I'll give it my best shot. But well done. Really appreciate that. Yeah, my name is Taoho Patuawa. I am a descendant of the tribes of Te Roroa, Ngāti Whātua and Ngāpuhi, here in Te Tautokero, Northland, New Zealand. I have a background in science. I have a bachelor's in marine biology, as well as a master's in applied science aquaculture. And I have just started into my 8th year working for my Iwi organisation. Previous to this, I did spend about 10 years working for NIWA, which is a Crown Research Institute of Aotearoa, New Zealand, and primarily their focus is on anything to do with water or atmospheric research. It is the National Institute of Water and Atmospheric Research, and stretches across, the broad spectrum of water systems that exist, as well as, atmospheric conditions, long-term climate change indicators, things like that. So I guess with that background in mind, and working in within the Māori Environmental Research Team at NIWA, the question of data sovereignty and connectedness between researchers and Indigenous communities has been, I've been around this kaupapa personally for, I guess nearly 20 years. And in that time and learning sort of the history of my people and our interactions with agencies, researchers and our whenua, and those collaborations and what works and what doesn't, and being able to hear some of those perspectives of some of our people that have worked in these areas previous to me. It's always been front of mind to look for mechanisms that allow for the rights and interests to be expressed and the connectedness between the communities, the place, the whenua in question where research takes place, and the results that are taken from the whenua, that are, the data that's collected, the data that's published, and the data that is shared to a wider audience. And that really, with that kind of broad background, and then bringing that to the context of working for my iwi organisation, there really hasn't been anything that has shown the right intent and critical thinking to be able to sort of align a lot of these issues. It's a very complex issue. I want to say that up front. Data sovereignty is a very complex issue, but with simple tools, and I think importantly, and to speak off the back of what Fern was saying, it all starts with the relationships that you build with the researchers in question, and how you push and how you move forward with that. So I was first introduced to the local context labels in 2019 through a workshop that was happening in Tamaki Makaurau. I went along not knowing much about sort of the kaupapa. It was in its infancy really in terms of expanding its outreach. But I went along and listened, and within I think it was most of a day workshop, but within the first couple of hours, I was very much attuned to the fact that this is one of those tools that could make a difference. It could really make a difference in that. So the first thing I want to acknowledge it really at this point is all the hard work and the critical thinking that's been put into it in making this tool accessible. And I also want to acknowledge, the people that have worked with us in the local context team that have been, super helpful in guiding the application of these labels and how we negotiate the system that they've put forward and integrating it into the work that we're currently doing. One of the big opportunities, I guess, that I've cottoned onto with the local context kaupapa is being able to introduce this into our everyday workflow, into just a normal part of creating new projects on contemporary projects of collaborations with researchers who are working on our whenua and interacting with our biocultural material, species, all those kinds of things. Yeah, and so in that respect, as Fern was saying, and to now, I guess, focus on the collaboration with Fern. As she said, she's second generation. She's the second generation conservator that has worked with our whānau in Waipoa for over 20 years. So the trust in the relationship has been one of the foundations for the success, I think, of this collaboration, and also one of the things that made the introduction of this piece of work to Fern pretty straightforward. She spoke well for herself and her kaupapa, so I don't really need to repeat that, but I do really want to take the time to reinforce it. And I think the big lesson learned from there, and one of the big takeaways of what local context is all about from the perspective of working on behalf of my iwi, is that it is all about creating good relationships with the researchers and organizations that you work with. Because if you don't have that, these labels would be difficult, but also you probably won't get any work done with them anyway, So, yeah. And we chose the biocultural provenance label as really just a placeholder. It says a lot in its presence. But it really is, we have been testing the applications of these labels on a number of different projects. Fern is one. What made Fern's project appealing was it was a master's thesis, so it came with a dissertation. And with that dissertation came the embedding of that document into the university library system, but also that document into the digital world. So the other thing that you would have seen on Fern's previous slide was the presence of the label on the front of her thesis document. And that's one of the that is one of the key, I guess, the key mechanisms and messages that we're really trying to convey is that in this digital world that we live in now, these publications, these stories that are written through research or through any means of interaction with our whenua, there is a digital output that comes out. So to be able to attach a provenance label to that output is one of the key key reasons why we engaged in this process with Fern, so that our presence as Tororoa will be carried along with her thesis, in perpetuity. Yeah, and there are other labels and things that we can explore in the future, but in terms of just being able to support Fern in her research and in writing up her thesis and support our intention to acknowledge that relationship, the BC provenance label was the first one that we started with, and we've brought that around full circle. So really stoked to be able to achieve that. Yeah, Fern's been awesome through the whole through the whole process of engaging and doing her work, as has the team from the University of Victoria. So yeah, I think I might wrap it there, Corey, and you can hand it across to those guys. Kia ora tātou.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. That was fantastic. So I'll share again. Great. So next we're going to hand it over to Ori Atkins, Nick Crombie, and Max Sullivan. We'll have you introduce yourself and I'll be doing your slides. So just let me know when to go next.
Okay. Tēnā koutou. My name's Nick Crombie and I am one of the Digital Research Service Coordinator here at the library.
Kia ora, I'm Matt Sullivan. I share the role with Nick. So we work on our open access repository systems, and I'll pass on to Ori.
Kia ora koutou. I'm Ori. I work as the Systems and Integration Developer here at the library.
Okay, so just to start us off, this is just a timeline of how long it took us to implement local contexts. Probably something important to note is that local context is currently only enabled for thesis deposit. So this is just us. So in January, Fern first contacted us, and then we had meetings in-house. In February, we had our first meeting with Local Contexts, Tahoe and Fern. March, April, we had discussions with our third-party vendors. By April, it was fully supported on self-deposit, and in May, Fern deposits a thesis. All right, so next slide, please, Corey. Okay, so just to explain a little bit about our self-deposit system, it is an in-house web application, which Ori designed. So this means that students can choose their own metadata and upload their own files, and then it sends into repositories for processing. And that's just the front page there, just on the left. All right, next slide, please, Corey. So we looked at the existing deposit process to make it simple for the student, the best way to incorporate it into our metadata. So we wanted to make it as simple as possible. So we only ask them for the project ID and use the API to get the information we need. All right.
Next slide, please. So in order to add it to the thesis deposit system, we decided that all we were going to do was ask two questions. Is the thesis part of a local context project? And if it is, what is that project ID? So the project has to already be a local context project. It has to already exist in the hub. And we provide links to say, well, if the student doesn't know what local context is, they can go find out and find out how to get the project ID there. Now, this was done because we rely a lot on the student entering their own metadata. At first, we were like, well, we don't want them entering the labels and notices themselves, because then people would just enter whatever. We want to make sure that it is actually a local context project and is actually using the labels and notices that have actually been applied to it. So all we ask for here is the ID. And then we use the API to pull in the metadata. Next slide, please. So here, this is just a brief data flow. I'm terribly sorry about the quality of this diagram. So here, starting on the left, the student deposits a thesis. This goes to our backend, which processes the metadata that they've sent us, validates it, makes sure it's all fine. Then it takes that ID and requests the data from local contexts, uses that to generate the appropriate notice or label metadata for our repositories, and then sends those to Figshare and DSpace. Now, we did have to do something a little bit different for both of those because different repository software has different metadata formats. Next slide, please. Yep. So our institutional repository, which is our internal archive, uses DSpace 6. This uses sort of Dublin core style metadata. Originally, we were considering using the DC rights field because this is rights information, but we're already using that field for several things, and it got a little weird when considering translations. because DSpace allows you to have multiple entries for the same metadata and tag it with which language it's in. And if you have multiple entries with the same key, it becomes very difficult to tell which entry is a translation of which field. So we decided ultimately to adopt a custom metadata schema here that maps very closely to the label types and notices, the label and notice types in the API, so that when this data is harvested by other clients, we can go back to the API and say, okay, for this type of label or notice, what icon should we be displaying? Because you'll notice here, DSpace 6 is a text-only format, so we cannot display the icons here. Additionally, we also include the project ID and URL as part of this metadata. Next slide, please. For our open access repository, which is our public repository, this is provided by Figshare, which is a third-party vendor. So we were even more limited in what we could do. We have approached them and asked for them to support local contexts as a metadata type to provide full, like the icon and all of the label text. They said to lodge a support ticket, so we're waiting to hear back about that. In the meantime, we have just created a custom text field that stores all of the labels or all of the notices, as well as the URL. And here you can see the data from Fern's thesis. You notice in the keywords also there, we have added the BC provenance tag, so that in future you will be able to go to our repository and you'll be able to say, okay, what research have we published that has a BC provenance tag? What research has a TK tag? Things like that. Right.
Next slide, please. Okay, so our theses get harvested via a feed from Figshare into a lot of different databases and platforms. So for us, the work hasn't finished. We want this local context metadata to follow the theses being harvested into other places. So if you land on a thesis in digital InVid, for example, if there's local context metadata, you'll see it there as well. So the two examples on the screen are from at the top, Te Waharoa. That's our library discovery system that uses Primo, and we've worked with our colleagues to set up a rule so that when it sees the keyword we saw on the slide before, we insert this metadata into the record. So people who come to the catalog discovery system and they find a thesis, if there's local context metadata, they see it there as well. You'll notice that the label here isn't customized yet. So we have a bit more work to do to pull on that customized label, but for now, we've just got the stock text. And the second record is digital InVid. So we let them know about our use of this label, and they were happy to put in this custom edit to the record for Fern's thesis in their system. But by having these conversations, we're raising awareness about local contexts, and we're hoping that it'll just become metadata that people see and use in all systems where it should be. Next slide, please. So onto the final slide from us. So we feel like this has been a really successful project. We've loved doing this work, but we couldn't have done it without the support from Corey, Emily, and Ashley from Local Contexts. It was amazing to work with you, and your website and all of your resources and examples have made this work just so much easier for us. It helps greatly to have a person like Ori, who understands library systems and has great developer skills, and they were able to put this together really quickly. We were conscious that Fern wanted to graduate, so we needed to get this work done in a way that was appropriate in time for Fern's plans as well. We didn't want to hold up Fern, so we're glad to be able to do that for you. In-house, it really helped us to have, management and teammates who were supportive. We didn't have to justify this work. They just said, get going, and we did. And our colleagues reviewed our work as well. So that really helps. As you've seen, we've worked in two different repository systems. So one is sort of fully open source, where we can do what we like, and the other is a vendor supplied system. And despite those differences, we've been able to do a good job, we think, in both places. So I think if you're approaching this work, I don't think the system, hopefully the system won't be the problem, it'll be how you implement it. And just finally, thank you so much to Fern and Tahoe. You came to us with this project, and we were really happy to do this work. And you've sort of laid a path for other students at our university and further to sort of see how this can be done. So thank you so much. And the final slide is just links to the examples that we've shown. So if you do want to have a look at our work, you can, and you're welcome to come to us for questions and advice. So that's it from us, and we're happy to take questions.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for those kind words. I didn't even ask you to say those. Those were so nice, though. We really appreciate it. It's been fantastic to work with all of you. So we had a couple of questions come in the chat. Please continue to send them or use the Q&A function, whatever is easiest for you. So I'll just start off with reading one of those. So can a TK or biocultural label be attached to a research output, even if the research organization has not bought into the local context system? And I'll take this question to start us off. So this is a great question. Thanks so much for asking. So a great way for a researcher to start this work is to create a researcher account on our Local Context Hub website. This is for individuals who are conducting research, collecting data, and by creating that account type, you can generate notices and collaborate with any communities that you are already working with through the hub. So I would say that's a great place to start. And, we think we've seen, pilot projects such as this lay some great foundation and groundwork to then maybe bring to your institution and talk about it on a bigger scale. So I'll leave it at that and happy to talk more about it. But Emily, do you mind reading the next question?
Sure. Yeah, we received another question that came in. It says, Kia ora, for Victoria University of Wellington, is a TK label usage a voluntary thing? Or is there some mechanism to catch all work that would relate to traditional knowledge? Anybody want to tackle that one?
Yeah, well, it is voluntary just because at the moment it's restricted only to thesis deposits. I think there is some question about how we would create a mechanism that complex to catch everything. So this is, but I mean, as Max said, this is just the beginning. So hopefully as we go on, we'll be able to apply it wider to more things than just theses, but this is just us for the moment.
Yeah, and I think the comment Fern made about the university actually having relationships that help students set up these projects is a really great one. And I think for us, we need to raise awareness in the university about what people can do here, what students can do, and supervisors as well.
Fabulous. Thank you. So Jeanette asked a question. Jeanette, would you like to read your own question from the chat?
Sure, Hilda. Were there any policy changes that Victoria had to do in order to include Māori data sovereignty, or was it just a practical project that just happened now and the policy might change?
I mean, I think this was just a practical project for now. As far as I'm aware, we don't have a specific thing for Māori data sovereignty. Well, we're not sure about that, but this is something that the library itself really cares about and really wants to focus on. So sort of the best way to promote a project is to kind of do it yourself, and then hopefully everyone else, because we have promoted it to the wider university, to the library, and to the research office. And the research office, who deals with all the postgrad students, are hopefully pushing it out to them. Because we only catch the end of the process, it's a bit hard, but we're doing our best. So
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Fantastic. Thank you. Gonna go to some of the submitted questions. So please feel free to continue to put in questions in the chat. So somebody submitted, are there any legal systems to ensure that users act in good faith? If not, how are you protecting Indigenous data sovereignty and cultural authority within your own context? Maybe that's something everyone, if you have something you'd like to share in regards to that, it can be in regards to this project, maybe tell how you want to talk about other work that you're working on and efforts that you're working on in your Iwi.
Yeah, so are there legal systems to ensure users act in good faith? To be honest, I think one of the beautiful things about local context is it doesn't lean on the legal system. What I really personally like about the local context in my particular use case, which again, just to reinforce, is how we try and build local context just into our normal day-to-day workflow with contemporary projects that we're working on today, with researchers and their organizations. So to me, it is less about the legal system and is more about the ethics of working with the researchers and the organizations that we represent. But really, it comes down to the ethics of the researchers. So again, this comes back to the relationships that you have with people. And I think one of the really good things about Aotearoa is we're small. We're small, and in particularly with kaupapa to do with our tile, with our environment. The network out there, it's a fairly tight network of people, and the more that we promote the use of tools like this, and the more that we can, I guess, showcase the intention of the use, the execution of the use, and the overall process. I think it goes a long way to settling down a lot of the questions that people may have about the legalities, because I think it's a hard thing to try and fight the digital age that we live in, but we've got to figure out practical ways of how we integrate and put our stamp, literally put our stamp as Indigenous communities alongside the research that gets conducted on our whenua. And these labels, I think, do a really good job of that. So it's probably a good response from my perspective, Corey.
Oh, thank you so much. Anyone else want to add anything about what is in place to protect, whether it's legal or extra legal? Any thoughts?
I guess we have had some experience here chasing people who do take research and do things that we don't approve of. And it is a hard job to use legal tools to find them and get a response, but it is possible, and that's something that we do act on here at the university. We've taken steps to help when this happens, but yeah, it's a hard battle, but it's a necessary one. And getting a response from tech companies in particular is extremely hard. But yeah, that's all I'll say.
Yeah, thank you. Great. We had a question submitted. Emily, do you mind reading that from the Q&A?
Yeah, of course. So this is a bit of a big question, so you all can feel free to answer however you see fit. The question reads, how do you think a tool such as labels will hold up against future risks presented by AI and other rapidly emerging digital technologies? So any ideas are welcome here.
So I was thinking about this in the shower this morning, actually. So with the current iteration of generative AI, I do think there is a risk that if you feed it research that uses labels, it will learn how to replicate those labels in its output. But because like systems like local contexts, you have the projects and the project IDs, and it's a separate website, it is very difficult to replicate all of that as well. So yes, you could get an AI that will generate a bit of research and it has a nice looking label on it that has a project ID on it, but then you go to that project ID and it either doesn't exist or it's a completely different project, right? It's one of those things where like any fake research or bad research, it's on the reader to take that step to say, actually, is this what it says it is? And I think that is a risk that all research faces. But having that space where you can go and check is going to be very important, I think.
Anybody have anything they want to add to that? Any thoughts? Okay. Yeah, it's a big question. We can mull on it, and come back to it. But we did have a question in the Q&A. Emily, do you mind reading that one as well?
Yeah, of course. So this question came in addition. They ask, will quantitative data associated with this thesis also have BC labels and metadata if deposited in Figshare or other data repositories? Or does this only apply to the thesis text?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think so. I guess in looking at the dissertation, so the thesis and then the data kind of separately. So Fern's work is part of quite a larger program of work that is happening around the health of our water systems, our awa, in this case the Waipoa awa, and also within the Waipoa Ngāhere context, because we kind of slowly but surely we're sort of trying to build to break down those silos between terrestrial freshwater systems as being separate, and bringing them sort of all together. So in the context of like a hard copy or a digital copy of the quantitative data that exists on Fern's thesis, I'm comfortable with the fact that that's all considered within the context of the label. But on the other side of that, with Fern's data, that is all openly shared with Te Roroa. So it has been brought into something that has been, if it hasn't been passed directly on to me, it can easily be accessed by myself. I am working on another system of how do I describe it quickly? Of trying to build a knowledge repository for our iwi, which does include the use of local context labels with data that's generated from projects, from any research projects, from operational projects, from normal day-to-day monitoring, or very specific things that are research project focused. So not only with the relationship does all of this kind of stuff happen with the labels being attached to the thesis and running through the Victoria University system, but also we are directly attached to the data from Fern. So I hope that answers the question. Fern, yeah, feel free to add anything on there if you like.
Thank you. So we had another question that I'll read here. Do you think local context labels can be used by agencies with hapu or iwi for practical operations such as environmental monitoring or eDNA research? Knowing Fern, your position, and Tauho, your work, wondering if you'd like to comment on that.
Yeah, so we do have an active project within the local context specifically around eDNA collection, and that was working with Wilder Labs, so working with Sean Wilkinson and his team. And really what we were trying to do with that one was to keep track of all those projects that are using eDNA as a methodology, and also being able to attach the outputs that are produced from WilderLab and creating a connection between that, which we've been successful in a bit of a pilot one with that one, but we still need some tweaking in the system, because originally the intention that I set it up as was to look at eDNA collection within the Rohe of Tororoa, specifically as an environmental monitoring tool. Now, what we've actually found is that because there are different uses of the eDNA methodology and slightly different use cases in terms of the methodology. So, for example, biosecurity incursions versus, more broad biodiversity investigations, they don't kind of nicely sit underneath the same kind of project. So yeah, that one's a little bit of a back to the drawing board, but we have set up a lot of the, I guess, the digital infrastructure to connect between the project within the Local Context Hub and the outputs that are produced by WilderLab. That sounds about right, doesn't it, Corey?
It does. Anything anybody wants to add, Fern? Cool. Emily, do you mind reading the next one?
Sure. So this next question is, how do you get Indigenous communities on board with this, especially if they don't have resourcing to pay for someone to engage with local contexts? Now, that's a big question that we see often.
Sorry, Emily, can you repeat that one? I was somewhere else in my mind.
Sure, yeah, of course, no worries. How does one get Indigenous communities on board with this kind of work, especially if they don't have resourcing to pay for someone to engage with it?
Yeah. Yeah, having a background in, I guess, well, for this particular use case, having a background in environmental research certainly helps. Having a sort of a lens on the wider issue, and seeing the benefits of what this tool of local context could do has been it has been the reason why I've been able to see the potential for its application. I've been waiting for a tool like this for quite some time. But here's the thing as well, even from 2019, it does take a lot of time, and building the knowledge within your teams does take time. So we really didn't get started with applying labels to projects until 2023. So that's 2019, 2020, 21, 22, 23. It was effectively 4 years of thinking about implementation, of working with the local context team about specific examples, and then also being mindful of all of the stuff that's happening within your rohe, within your areas of interest, and being able to keep tabs on that. Like, it's hard. There's a lot happening, as anyone in a position similar to myself will know. But what I've had to do was to pick and choose from all of those projects, look at them through a lens of, one, what is the relationship like with the researchers, which is good to actually acknowledge, because usually where these have been really successful with projects getting initiated, it's always on that researcher to researcher kind of level. And if we're talking about, the work that we're doing in collaboration, this conversation about local context is a very easy one to have, because they get it, Where it becomes a little bit more difficult can be with the agency level, as I think there's a comment in there in the chat from Day West, who is with the Department of Conservation. And it's good to actually highlight this, because you don't know until you try. You've just got to throw it in there. I knew it was going to cause, a few headaches within the agency, but that's okay. We've got to take the time and work through the processes. But the intent is a good one. We've got to always remember that the intent of these labels is a very, very good intent, you know, and if legal advisors and things want to get involved and look at it, that's, you know, that's fine. That's them doing their due diligence in their job. But at the end of the day, you know, it's quite simple to say that the intention is good relationships in terms of researcher and community. And also being able to, you know, with the outlook of having, you know, having these labels visible on any of the outputs that are produced from the work that we do. So yeah, so picking and choosing projects, starting small, is also a good, you know, is also a good idea. Don't choose, you know, we've got projects that have been going, you know, that have been going for 20 years, even longer. Health of our Coady Forest and all of the threads of research that we are, you know, that we are connected with in Waipoua is massive. That's a job for later on, once we've kind of got all of this other stuff kind of smoothed out and the application. I'm really looking at that one as when we've got the application, the workflow of how we build local context just normally into our project development is just a standard part of project design. So yeah, it's one of those things. And I mean the best thing that I can do is work with good people like we have here and promote it. This webinar has been, you know, a good platform to do that. I've given several talks with Local Contexts as well about the different applications, which is always good. And so being able to sort of showcase the range of projects that we're working on, the specific applications that you know, that we're looking at for each individual project, and just trying to create that mindset that this is just a natural part of how we work in a project of collaboration with researchers, with agencies, with whomever. Even within ourselves and the projects that we do in our own environmental monitoring as an iwi organisation, you know, and I think, yeah, it's another thing to build a team around it, but we're working on that. And then it's also another kind of thing to build the awareness amongst our own people about, again, the intention of the labels. And the application of it and what it looks like at the end when you've got your outputs. And I think Fern's example is, yeah, it's a fantastic, well, it's a fantastic piece of work as a thesis, you know, but it's also a fantastic piece of work to initiate this type of implementation of a data sovereignty tool.
Thank you. That was fantastic. So there's a question that I think will lead us very nicely to a final question for everybody here before we close out. Kind of thinking about future work. What's next for this work, whether it's the research itself, integration, Taua other projects, anything that you want to share that you're looking forward to or thinking about in regards to local context. So whoever would like to start, that would be fantastic. It could be short or long, whatever you'd like.
I guess in the library, we've got a few other systems that this is appropriate to work on. And we've shared this with our colleagues who work on those systems, and they're thinking about it as well. And another piece of work that we would like to see happen is Crossref. So that's the place that creates the DOI that Fern's thesis has. And they don't have a space for local context yet, but it's on their radar now. And DataCite, which was in one of the questions, they've documented how you can use it. So we want Crossref to come on board. And then, you know, like so many publications that use scientific publications that have a DOI and a local context metadata would be captured, and then it would be able to flow into other systems as well. So that's two little things from us.
Yeah, I also think looking at getting things applied retroactively, especially down in Tapuaka, our archive. But also there is definitely a lot of historical research that if someone came to us and said, actually, I have this label that I want to apply it to it now, like we would want to be able to do that work. And looking at expanding it into the wider university community, because I think that we, as a university, as a research institution, have a responsibility to support this kaupapa and do some of the work. It shouldn't always be on the Indigenous communities to be the one to start these conversations.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that. I think in the future, I'd just like to see it be far more widespread. And what I touched on when I first spoke about seeing the university and supervisors leading the charge with forming those relationships and trust with Indigenous communities, and just getting people thinking about data sovereignty. And yeah, that's.
Thank you. Anything?
I've said enough, but there's plenty happening. There's plenty happening for the future, and yeah, hopefully very soon we've got some a couple of big projects in the pipeline trying to showcase the labels alongside our data, and particularly GIS, geospatial data. And being able to put conditions on sharing, conditions on the sharing protocols on the data that we are aligned to, not only within what we produce ourselves, but also with all of the other projects of collaboration that we work with agencies and institutions. So yeah, hopefully soon.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. Especially lovely to hear from you all. Thank you to our attendees as well. We're going to close out with a couple ways to stay updated, get involved. We know we didn't get to all the questions, but hopefully if you're able to, for instance, join an upcoming info session or hub demo, you might get some of your questions answered. So if watching this webinar inspired some ideas with how local context could be used in your community, institution, or researcher in your research, we would suggest reviewing materials on our website, especially our short films and support pages. We would love to have you join one of our international peer working groups or regional networks related to this webinar. We have a working group for Indigenous communities, for libraries, for cultural institutions, and a regional network for Aotearoa. And Emily, I'll pass it over to you.
Great. Yeah. So for upcoming webinars and conferences about local contexts and to attend our regularly offered information sessions and hub demo sessions, you can see the events page on our website. And we also have a seasonal newsletter and accounts on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn, as well as a Vimeo and YouTube channel, which is where this recording will be posted. So thank you all again, and we will now close out this fantastic webinar with a karakia by Dr. Jeanette Hamilton-Pierce.
Kia ora, Emily. I just want to say a big, huge thank you to Ta'o and Te Roroa. That work has just been amazing that you've been doing. Fern, congratulations on your thesis. It is amazing. And a big, huge congratulations to Victoria University. Anei he karakia whakamutuna, ko mutu a mātou mahi mō tēnei wā, kia tau te rangi Mārie, kia tau te aroha, kia uki o tātou mahi, hei oranga wairua I manakitua mai mātou katoa, o mātou hoa, o mātou whānau, ai o ki te aorangi, kia rangi nei ki runga, kia papatūnaku ki raro, ai o ki ngā mea katoa. Tihei mauri ora. Kia ora no tātou.
Kia ora, Jen.